Hello, welcome back to the Arturia Profit video series, and we're dealing with the VS, and this episode is all about the modulation matrix and kind of the low frequency oscillators as well, but let's concentrate on the matrix. It looks complicated, but it really isn't. What's going on is that we've got a set of controls that are capable of doing stuff. They might be knobs or sliders or a modulation wheel, but we've got things that want to do something. Now, rather than making them do only one task, like on an analog synthesizer, you'll have a slider that does a single job. With a modulation matrix, any one of those controls can be mapped to a wide range of different destinations. So you could want to change the frequency of any of the four oscillators, or mix levels between them, or change values on the low frequency oscillator. And you can see along the top we've got all of the different destinations that we can apply an effect to, and we do it by clicking on these little buttons. So if I want to control the frequency of oscillator A with the low frequency oscillator 1, I press that little button, the light comes on, and now as things stand at the moment, nothing's going to happen. Let's press a key. There we go. So we're not hearing any change of frequency. The reason for that is the amount value over here is still set to 1. So this is the amount of change that's going to be applied to whatever setting we've assigned. So if I make that maximum, and like a genius, I've got oscillator C engaged, so let's bring A on. And now there's the low frequency oscillator pulsing backwards and forwards. So while we're dealing with the LFO, let's jump over here and just finish this off. The rate knob controls the speed. Sync turns it into a host-based fractional measurement instead. And here are all the different shapes we've got. So if we pick a sawtooth, it's drawing a classical sawtooth wave with our frequency. So that's the LFO1 being applied to the frequency, but let's change it to cutoff instead. This is a sine wave over here, so let's introduce something that's actually got some frequencies. Back to the triangle. The on-off of a square wave. Pretty straightforward stuff. You can have any number of destinations mapped to the same control. There's absolutely nothing stopping us doing this kind of business. Now, the frequencies of A, B and C are all being modulated simultaneously, but oscillator D is still static in the background. Don't be fooled by that pulsing sound, that's got nothing to do with frequency, that's just the cutoff. So the cutoff is being applied to all four oscillators, so that's still operating on oscillator D. The pitch effect was just on A, B and C. LFO2 is just the same, don't need to cover that. A very common one that we see is velocity being attached to cutoff. So I'll just disable, I don't have to disconnect all of those LFO options. I can just turn the amount down to 0 and it won't do anything anymore. Let's turn this velocity value up instead. And what this is going to do, if I get my sawtooth wave back, is if I hit the key lightly, it's quite a soft sound. If I hit it harder, you get a much sharper sound. So it's applying a variation to the filter cutoff depending on how hard you hit the key. Very common to see that one. It's also very common to see keyboard cutoff. So this means that the higher up the keyboard you go, you basically get like a slope on the filter, so it gets more and more dramatic as you travel up the keyboard. If I press a very high note on the keyboard, let's just engage it. Press a very high note on the keyboard, then it'll be quite dull. And then when we engage key follow keyboard, it gets much brighter. So the higher up you go, the sharper it gets. Eventually there's going to be no cutoff left, and you're not going to hear any difference of sound, because once again, once a gate is completely open, once the filter cutoff is completely disengaged, it can't do any more. It doesn't add frequencies. Now the filter envelope has a quirk about it that you need to be aware of, and that is that the envelope amount matters. So even though we might draw a shape with the envelope, filter envelope, so we've got like a 2-second attack phase here, 3 seconds, that's not going to have an effect if the envelope amount is turned to 0. So if I ask it to change the frequency of oscillator C, we don't hear any change to the frequency of oscillator C. If I introduce this envelope amount, two things are going to happen. One, we're going to get the modulation of the frequency that we've asked for. Two, the filter's going to do its thing. It's still a filter. If we've got a cutoff value anything less than maximum, then it's going to apply that filter as well. Firstly, just the cutoff on its own without any modulation being applied. So that's the filter envelope sweep. Now we introduce frequency modulation as well. Those two things are operating at the same speed because they're using the same envelope. The amplifier envelope, again, similarly, is operating on the volume. So it's going to have an effect on the volume of whatever we ask it to do. So again, let's have a 2-second attack. So now it's going to go from quiet to loud over 2 seconds, and let's do the cutoff. Why not? So in order to hear this, I'll just disengage the filter, increase the modulation amount. So it was the amplifier envelope actually affecting the cutoff, the filter cutoff. So we're getting a filter sweep off the amplifier envelope. Finally, the modulation wheel. Pretty straightforward stuff. Again, let's attach it to the cutoff, increase it to the maximum, and now very basic. I've dealt with each of those things in isolation in order to demonstrate what's going on, but you can basically turn everything on and absolute chaos reigns. So many different modulation sources there. It's having a fairly devastating pan effect on my brain. So if you really feel inclined to count the number of little dots in this matrix and then do some pretty simple maths, you can calculate the utterly colossal number of different combinations of effects that you can achieve. It's kind of ridiculous. You can also see quite a lot of grayed out values. We'll deal with that in the next video. That's to do with hybrid mode. So when we introduce both of these synthesizers simultaneously, we can create a composite sound using both engines, and the modulation matrix can cross between synthesizers, so you can have controls from one synthesizer affecting outputs on the other. The two synthesizers really lock quite tightly together and can create some absolutely crazy effects. We'll deal with that in the next video, and if you subscribe and hit notifications, then you'll find out when that comes out. Hope to see you then. Thanks very much for watching.